Morning, all.
Good morning. Jeff, I have a question.
Fire away, Marcia.
Okay, when I was doing the frame of the windows, I had to do it the long way because I missed something in the video and in your notes. And can I go? I'm making like a book. I'm keeping a book
Yep.
with, and they're really like recipes of how to do the different.
Sure. And that intersection that we're talking about there, that's the most complex of the selection modifiers we can do. And I think it's the hardest for people to wrap their brains around. So the hard way, quote unquote, was to select the area with a rectangular marquee and then to subtract from it the window panes using a quick select or magic wand. And that gets you the results that you want. But it would be nice if we could get the intersection between the rectangular selection that we've made and then everything that is that dark frame color. So the trick is that after you've made that initial selection, are you a Mac or a Windows person?
I'm a Mac.
You're a Mac person. So after you've made that initial selection, you're going to hold down the Shift and the Option key, and that's going to tell Photoshop that you want the next thing that you select to be an intersection. So if you pick up the magic wand and you hold the Shift and the Option and you go click on that dark wooden frame, what you're saying is, I want you to magic wand this area that I'm clicking on, but it should be the intersection of this selection and the previous one. And what that does is it restricts it to just that area inside the frame.
Okay, I did that.
And what'd you get? Were you on the background layer when you tried it? Because if
okay.
If you're on the wrong layer,
I did it both ways. And I got the sky on the layer. I was able to, go in and make a new layer, and I always ended up with the sky. So I tried doing the cursor on the black, and that gave me the sky. Is that correct?
No, it should have given you. So let's see. Yeah, we've got a few minutes.
You know what I think I might have done? I probably was on my copy and not the original.
That's my guess.
Would that have been the problem?
Yeah, because if you're on that background layer, you're dealing with sort of the full image, and I think it's going to work the way you'd expect it to. I actually happen to have that image up on screen right now, so I'll show you what we're talking about here.
Okay.
Can you see that now?
I can. And if you could go through the steps so that I can write them down a little clearer, because I watched your video probably 5 times trying to see.
I wasn't clear enough. Okay, let's do it.
No. I was missing something. It was me, I'm sure.
So I'm going to disable all the other layers that I've built up. This is the baked cake that Julia Child pulls from underneath the counter and sets on top. Here we've got one already finished. So let's turn off all those other layers. So I'm going to go back to my background layer here. That's the piece I'm starting with. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit to the more dense frame. So I'm hitting M for the marquee tool, and I'm making that initial selection. I'm going to do Shift M, so I get the square marquee instead of the round one. So I have an initial.
That was something that I learned, that the feather, if I had that feather up too high, my rectangle became an oval.
Yes, because it's blending or softening those edges. In the case of this selection, I don't have any need to feather the edges. So I've got a 0 feather here.
Okay, that was the other thing.
Relatively hard edge selection. So right now, if I were to copy this up to another layer with a Command or Control J, I'm going to get everything that's within this rectangle, aren't I? Including the window panes. What I'd like to do is I would like to save myself the many clicks that it would take to deselect each of the individual frames. So I can switch to the magic wand. I've got it at a decent tolerance here of like 32 or so. And yes, if you watch my cursor closely, you can see that if I hold the Option key down, it gets a minus next to it. Indicating that I would be subtracting those selections. But if I hold the Option and the Shift key at the same time, you'll see I get a little asterisk instead. And that's the indicator for this is going to be an intersection with whatever is already selected. So I have a magic wand.
Stop right there for just a minute. when you had the shift key and the option key.
Yep.
And you held that, you went down together with that. And then do you go with the wand, all three of them at the same time, or just one?
So the shift and the option, I've picked up the wand already. I have that tool in my hand. Okay. And then with the shift and the option, I'm telling Photoshop how I want that wand selection to be treated. And by clicking in the frame area with that intersecting shortcut option and shift at the same time, I'm telling it, all right, what is the intersection of everything that's black with everything that's inside this rectangle? And when I do, and I click in any of the black areas inside the rectangle, you will see that it has excluded the contents of the windows. It has only selected the pane itself.
But do you hold the shift option key down all the time that you're doing that?
You just have to hold it for that initial click. Let me,
the first click.
Yep. Let me bump this up a little bit more.
My issue, Jeff, is I do that and it's not selecting anything.
I wonder if you're on the background layer, because if you've already copied stuff up to another layer, if I go to one of my other layers, like this one, the curved layer, I don't have anything in that area. So there's nothing for it to select. But if I'm on that background layer, then I can hold the command, or excuse me, the shift and the option, or shift and alt if you're a Windows user. And I'm telling Photoshop that I want the magic wand to make this intersection. And it's the intersection that I think is the hardest for people to sort of process and make sense of, because it's a combination of two things.
I only have the background layer. I don't have a single layer yet.
Have you made an initial selection with the rectangular marquee as I did around the frame here?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then you've picked up the magic wand.
Yes.
And you hold the shift and option key. What's your magic wand tolerance set for?
I had it for 32.
Yeah. And are you set for contiguous, or is this unchecked up here?
Contiguous.
Okay. And then I have sample all layers turned off because I only wanted to sample from the current layer that I'm on.
I think mine's on.
Uncheck that. That might help.
Okay.
But yeah, with this initial selection, which as you can see from the quick mask, is the entire window frame, including the window panes. But if I shift option or shift alt and then use the magic wand to click anywhere inside the box that's on the black frame, I'm going to get all the frame within the box. And there's my intersection of the two. No window panes.
I see it.
Is that working for you?
Yep, I see it.
Good. Outstanding. So that's your quick before class starts demo.
When we bring the that image over from Lightroom, it says edit with Lightroom adjustments, or just edit a copy. Which one should we select?
Your versions probably don't have any Lightroom adjustments in them, but since that's normally what we want, is to edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments applied, 9 times out of 10, you want that first choice. In this case, because I had this layered file with all the other pieces in it, I went ahead and opened the original so that you guys could see this version rather than a copy of it where everything had been flattened down.
And we should select from the overall image that you have, not down in the individual files that you have under that you sent. Is that correct?
Well, you're just going to open up whatever image we happen to be working on at the time.
Okay. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. A beautiful week for photography. I hope you got out in the middle of the week when it was 78 degrees out and sunny. What a
good morning.
Morning, Sue. Nice to have you here with us.
Yes.
All right. So it's week 4 already. How did we get to week 4 so quickly?
We went through weeks 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, is that what happened? All right. That's fair enough.
It has been fast.
That's fair enough. All righty. Let me get my screen up here. So at the end of last week's class, I walked you all through an exercise utilizing all of the selection and layer techniques that we've learned so far to fix all of the broken windows in that boardwalk photograph. I started by selecting various areas of the windows in the background layer and copying those selections to their own transparent layers with a Command or Control J. Once I had my various window selections on different layers, I was able to construct that composite image where I used each of the different pieces, the sort of tight frame and the loose frame and the little curved bit and the little straight bit with all the filigree in it. And I used those pieces to fill in some of the missing windows. The layer copies that I made by making an initial selection and then Command or Control J to copy them up to their own layer, those layer copies can be moved around. We can duplicate them several times. We can flip them back and forth. Whatever we need to do to transform them so that we can patch those areas where the window frames had been knocked out. And by copying the various window pieces into their own layers, I was able to replace all the broken ones with fixed ones and create a convincing composite. Here's my finished version. I'm going to option click on the background layer's visibility eyeball, this little thing right here. If I option click on that, it'll hide all the other layers and just show me this one. So I grabbed this little piece of curved filigreed work right here, and I made a copy of it, and I flipped that copy and I pasted it over here. There's the curve. And if I look at it by itself, it's literally just that piece with transparency. Remember that this checkerboard is showing us transparency. This is if I'm holding a clear sheet of plastic with a little sticker on it that's the shape of that curve. So the curve was that first piece, and then I took the straight piece and I copied that over from over here to over here. So we have the curved piece and the straight piece that fixes the little detailed bits at the bottom here. I then went and I made a selection of this looser frame here, the one that doesn't have as many panes in it. And that loose frame I copied and moved over to here. In fact, I made another copy of it and moved it over here. And I even cloned in a few extra bits, a little advanced work here to get the bottom of it to fill out the rest of that frame. We haven't quite gotten there yet. I then made a copy. I went back to my background layer so that I could make a selection of the tight frame here. And once I had made a selection of the tight frame, I could copy it again here. I made a second copy of it and put it over here. I made a third copy of it and put it over here on the right. And then I came in here and kind of erased bits and pieces and copied bits and pieces to make a little bit of a patch here. It's a little sloppy, but it'll do for the quality of the job that I'm going for here, which was sort of quick and dirty and finished. But I want you to notice in all of these cases, let's actually turn off the background layer. So here are my patches. And with the exception of the little detailed bits down here where I wasn't too worried about what was going on in the background, all of my little window panes here are transparent. And what that allows me to do, of course, is to show through the clouds and the sky that are in the background without any kind of repetition. So I'm going to option click on the background. This is without our little patches. You can see there's a diagonal cloud that runs across here and another one that runs across here. And I want those to be preserved. And indeed they were. Each of my little selections, that diagonal cloud is still there. And that little cloud is still there. So this is how it all comes together. And I hope you all have taken a little time to practice this stuff from the last classes regarding selections and layers. If you don't practice this stuff, I can tell you from experience that it won't stick. And you'll have a hard time remembering how to do it in the future. This is what I like to call use it or lose it knowledge. So I hope you're taking some time in between classes to get comfortable with the material. The more you use this stuff on a regular basis, the better it'll stick with you, the more it'll make sense to you, and the more quick you will be to recall it when you reach for it the next time you do it. So this week, I'd like to continue this discussion about layers, and I want to extend your skill set with some information on creating layer masks, adding layer effects, and adding adjustment layers. There's some special things we can do with layers. If time permits, we will also talk about some of the basic painting tools like the brush and the pencil and the gradient fill. There will be a bonus video on your student webpage this week that will go along with this week's class material. It actually runs about 40 minutes long, and it's called Putting It All Together. And this video will bring together everything that we will have covered in the first 4 weeks of class into a single set of exercises that you can follow along and practice with. It uses the sample images that you all have. And these include things like how to make selections, how to use layers, and how to use layer masking, something that we'll be spending a fair amount of time on this week. So if you're attending class today and you don't need to catch up by watching the video, I would actually start with the bonus video because it's going to be a summary that brings together all the things that we talk about. Obviously, for those of you who couldn't attend the live class session, watch the video first because we're going to cover some things that we haven't yet talked about. I highly encourage you all to watch the supplemental videos in between the class sessions if you get a chance. We don't have as much time in class as I'd like for each of these topics, so these videos give me an opportunity to fill in some of the gaps with details. I don't imagine anybody's complaining about several extra hours of bonus video. Like the regular class videos, they do give you the ability to pause and rewind and rewatch any segments that might be confusing to you. Before I jump into any new material, are there any questions from the previous material? For a few of you who may have not been here right when class started, I did show how to make that intersecting selection so that we could get the window frames without the window panes. So are there any questions? I'm going to include that little section in this week's video because I thought it was rather relevant to everybody. So yeah, I'll open it up to any questions from last week or the previous weeks.
Jeff, I have a question. When you were showing how you copied all your sections, the windows and everything, they created their own layer, a new layer. Could you have copied them onto the same layer?
Yes, I could have, but it would have been a little more laborious because in each case, I would have had to go to the background, make my little selection, copy it, and then switch to the layer where all the pieces are going to be and paste it. And the reason that I didn't do that, and I could in fact merge all of those patch layers into a single layer. So I've got the one thing, but because I knew I was going to construct my fix out of several different copies of each of those sections, I went ahead and made them individual so that I could make another copy of the loose window and another copy of the tight window, and then arrange them as I saw fit. Yeah, later on in the game, if I want to save space in my file or get rid of a bunch of layers, it's very easy for me to merge all of those into a single layer and keep the transparency so that it still floats above the background. Excellent question.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, well then we'll move on. So last week, we began our discussion of layers by talking about how we can copy a selection of pixels from our background layer image and stash them in their own separate layer. That's where we put all those little window frame pieces. And the most basic layer type is an image layer or a pixel layer, which contains a photo or a logo or anything else made out of colored pixels. We used layers to hold copies of the various window pieces that we had borrowed from that background in the boardwalk photo. Well, Photoshop also offers us several other kinds of layers. We have text layers. Let's see if I can find this here. We have text layers right here that allow us to place editable text in our images. And by editable, I mean I can select it and alter the text like I could if I were in a word processor. There are adjustment layers, which can change the appearance of the layers below them. Down here, I have a black and white adjustment layer or a photo filter layer. And what that means is that everything below this layer is going to get turned black and white. That's an adjustment layer. There are shape layers that allow us to place editable vector-based shapes. They're not based on pixels, they're based on vectors, a point and a line segment and a point and a line segment. So we can scale them up or down. There are even layers known as smart objects, but that's a little advanced for the basics class. I cover that in the intermediate Photoshop class. We get a little more into smart objects. We won't worry about them for now. As I mentioned in the last class section, layers are going to be used by us when we're constructing our image. We're going to use them like scaffolding to hold up the structure of what we're trying to assemble in Photoshop. So let's take a close look at all of the various layer controls that can be found inside the layers palette. There is a whole lot going on in a tiny amount of real estate on the screen, and it is somewhat overwhelming to look at when you first encounter it. So let's break the layers palette down into 3 sections: the top, the middle, and the bottom. You're looking at the middle section right here, a bunch of individual layers and all of their various pieces and controls. So we'll start with this middle section. This is where you will see the layers of your image displayed with their thumbnail. Here's the little layer thumbnail right here on the left, and the name, background, background copy, layer 1. If you want to change a layer name, just double click on it and you'll be able to actually call it hockey player or background photo or whatever is a helpful name for you. Each of the individual eyeballs that you see here will turn on and off layer visibility. Clicking on that eyeball will turn off the entire layer and all of its little subparts. If you look up at this top layer, layer number 1, you'll see there's 2 more eyeballs. One of them will turn on or off any layer effects we have applied to that particular layer. And this one is one specific layer effect, the outer glow that sort of puts a glow around our pixels here. So I could turn this one off, but leave other effects on. There aren't any in this case. So the eyeball does the same thing wherever it is. It turns on or off the visibility of a specific element. One effect, all the effects, the entire layer. What you see to the right of the pixel thumbnails is a thumbnail for the layer mask. We're going to get into these momentarily. And then in between the thumbnail for the pixels on the layer and the thumbnail for the mask for that layer, you'll see a little link here. And what this link means is that these 2 things are linked together. And if you move them, you're moving them both at the same time. Most of the time, that's what we want. I would want my mask and my image to move together as a pair. So generally, those are going to be linked together. The last thing I'll draw your attention to in this illustration is the lock that's right down here on the background layer. That indicates that the background layer can't be moved. We can't drag it around the screen and move it. Its position is locked. We can still paint on it. We can still erase from it. The contents haven't been locked. But as I mentioned, that background layer is a special layer. It's always opaque. It can never have transparency, and its position is fixed and locked in place. So that's the central part. And if you look at the example image that I have up in Photoshop right now, you will see that indeed that's exactly what I have over here. Is I have a bunch of individual layers. I've given them each a name. I can turn their visibility on and off by clicking their little eyeballs. I can change their name by double clicking and say right hand curve. And if I try and move the background layer, I'm going to select the background layer, pay attention to what layer you're on. That little highlight is going to show you what layer is active. I cannot move the background layer. If I click and I drag, it's not going anywhere because the layer is locked. If you would like to convert that background layer into a regular floating layer that can have transparency and be moved, you literally only need click on the lock. And when I do, I can grab that background layer and I can move it independently of all the other layers. You can see why I might not want to do that in this case. So we'll leave that locked. Those are those basic indicators. At the top of the layers palette, come on, show me that screen if you would. For some reason, my notes don't want to display. There we go. At the top of the layer palette is one set of controls for filtering the layers by kind or by name or a bunch of attributes. You guys aren't going to need this stuff up here. This would, if you get to a document that's got 20 or 30 layers in it, and you just want to see the pixels, or you just want to see the adjustments or the texts or the shapes or the smart objects, you can turn this filter on and it'll hide the other layers from you. You guys, in the course of this class, I don't expect your documents to get that complex. So you can basically ignore this entire top section here. It's really not important on simpler documents. Much more important are the controls for the blend mode, which is going to tell Photoshop how this layer of pixels is going to interact with the layers that are below it. The opacity of this layer, how transparent or opaque it is. The fill for this layer, how much it's, I'll see if I can get to a good explanation of the difference between opacity and fill. Mostly we're working with opacity for transparency. Fill has to do with how much the pixels are or aren't there. It's a little more subtle. Don't worry about it now. Confuses me on a good day. And then we've got a bunch of locks down here in this section. And this is all still at the top of the layers panel, right above our individual layers that were in the middle section. And these locks allow us to lock down on a layer the areas that are opaque or painted. So once I've made one of those layers with the window frame on it, I could lock it so that nothing else I paint in there is going to get in there because I've locked the opacity. I can lock the ability to paint. I can lock the ability to move it. I can lock the ability to crop it. I can lock the whole thing, basically. You can just lock it down so it can't be moved or changed. The pixels can't be changed. The position can't be changed. This allows you to, well, pin down parts of your picture as you're working on them if they might get a little squirmy on you. I don't find myself using these all that often. I will occasionally lock down the position of a layer, particularly if I have that option in the move tool that auto selects a layer for me. I don't want to accidentally click on something and scooch it a little bit, so I might lock down a layer in that case. Mostly these are secondary functions. What we really care about is blend mode and opacity. How transparent or opaque is my layer, and how is it being blended in with the layer that's below it? That's what those controls are going to let us adjust. The very bottom of the layers palette are all of the different controls for creating, deleting, grouping, all the different various types of layers. These are quite handy, and these get used often when I am working with layers, all the time. The first icon you see on the left that looks like a pair of links in a chain, those will link multiple layers together so they move as one when you reposition them. So I could take several of those window frames, link them together, and as I click and drag, all the layers will move as if they were on a single layer, but they're still separate. We've linked them together position-wise. The second icon you see there with the FX will allow you to add a layer effect, which lets you do sort of special effects to any of the pixels that are in a given layer. So in one of those layers with the window frame, I could add an effect that would change the color, or draw a stroke around it, or put a glow around it, or put a shadow behind it. All of these little effects apply to whatever pixels are in that layer. And we're going to do a bunch of live demonstrations of how the effects layers work. This third one that you see that says layer mask, this is crucial and a focal point for today's lesson. The icon to create a layer mask allows you to mask off or hide parts of a layer so that only some of it is visible. This is going to be a very useful option when it comes to combining multiple elements into a single image. Layer masks allow us to display only the pixels that we want from a layer while hiding all of the ones that we don't want to display. They're there. They've just been masked out, like covering up with masking tape. If you've ever painted a window before, you know that you get in there and you put the masking tape down where you don't want the paint to show. Layer masks allow us to display only the pixels we want from a given layer while hiding all the ones we don't want displayed. And because the mask is separate from the pixels, it can be edited to reveal or conceal different areas. We're going to get back to layer masks in just a minute. In the dead center there, you'll see the adjustment layer. And as I mentioned earlier, that will create an adjustment, a visual adjustment. Maybe it's a saturation or a hue shift. Maybe it's contrast, curves, or brightness, or a number of things that will get applied to any layers that are below that. Think of it as like, well, sort of a filter in a layer. The group layers icon, the one that looks like a little folder here, that allows you to take a bunch of layers and group them together for easier management. This is more important when you have a lot of layers. But if I want, I could take all of the layers with the window frame patches and group them together into one layer group. And it gets its own little visibility icon, so I can turn the eyeball on and off for that entire group. The little plus symbol that you see at the very bottom of the layers palette is the new layer or duplicate layer icon. Create a new layer by simply clicking on the icon. If you command or control click on this icon, it will make a duplicate layer of whatever layer you're on below the current one. You can also take one of your layers that's in the layers palette, grab it by the thumbnail and drag it down onto this plus icon, and it will duplicate and make another layer. You can also do Command J, and that will make a layer via copy. And then, of course, the little trash can on the end will let us delete a layer. Make sure the right layer is active when you hit the trash can icon, so that's the one that gets deleted. Or if you're visual, click and drag that layer by its thumbnail down to the trash can. You can control the stacking order of the layers by dragging them above or below each other to move them closer to the background or more towards the foreground of your stack. And you will see a blue insert cursor indicating where that layer is going to go when you let your finger off the mouse. The only layer you can't move in the stack is the background layer because it's locked down at the bottom of the stack. You can, as I mentioned a moment ago, convert the background layer to a traditional floating layer, complete with transparency, either by double-clicking on the layer name or in the newer versions of Photoshop by clicking the little lock. This removes the lock and would allow you to move that layer up or down in the layer stack like any other normal layer, or position it left, right, up, or down within its own layer. So I'm going to do a quick demo of some of those things here. So if I want to group all of my layers together, all of my patches here, I'm going to click on the first layer, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down and go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to Shift click on the bottom layer. That's going to select everything between them. And with all these layers now active, I'm going to click that little folder icon, this little group icon at the bottom here, not F6, F5. There we go, right here. That will put all of these into a single group, now called Group 1. I might double click on that and call it Window Patches. And if I click this tiny little triangle, let me zoom in a little bit here, make it a little easier to see. This little triangle right here will spill open and show me all the individual layers that are inside there. Now, the nice thing about putting these in a group is I didn't have to really link them to move them. If I have the entire group selected, I'm moving them all at once because I've got them all selected. With the entire layer group selected, I can hide them all at once by turning off the visibility of the entire group. If I only want to disable an individual layer, I have to open it up and I can take out, let's say I take out the right-hand curve by clicking only on its visibility. And if I want to rearrange the order of these, I could take my right-hand curve and drag it up here. Notice I get a little blue cursor in between other layers, and that's letting me know where this layer is going to get dropped when I let it go. So I could move my curve up there. I'll take my straight piece and I'll move it up here. I can even take multiple layers like the straight and the right-hand curve, and I can move both of them together to a different position in the layer stack. Now they're all the way up at the top. Was there a question?
Yeah. So why would you move a layer? Because the photo, the compressed photo, will still look the same, right? No matter what the order is. What's the point of moving a layer?
In this case, because I'm dealing with layers that are otherwise transparent other than their frames. Let's turn off the background layer. There's not a big consequence to the layer order because there's nothing in front of or behind anything else. But there are plenty of other situations where I need to move something in front of something else so it isn't being obscured. If you remember the demo from last week with the 3 shapes, let's see where that is. That must be in the layers section here. Yeah, if you remember this demo, one of the reasons that I might need to change my layer order is that my fleur-de-lis is behind my heart and my blue burst is behind them all. And if I want to be able to see that fleur-de-lis, I have to take it and move it up in the layer stack. That is to say, towards the front, not towards the paper background. And if I drag it up there, all of a sudden that's in front. Or I can take the blue one and make that one in front. So there are plenty of times where our layers aren't so transparent around them.
Okay.
And we might need to move one in front of the other. So if I'm trying to combine these two, if the heart is in front of the fleur, I only see the tiny little points sticking out. If it's behind the fleur, I can see both more clearly. So there's a situation where it makes sense to arrange those layers. I might have a piece of text that I want to make sure is in front of a little background, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Make sense?
It does.
Good. I like it when it makes sense. Other questions about this part? So these are the basics. I can link layers together. Now, like I said, by putting them in the group folder, they're going to move together if I'm holding the entire group, the whole folder here. That's what I move. Yeah, I can move them all as a group. But if I go down into that folder and I go grab one of my tight frames and I go to move it, it's going to move by itself because it's not linked to any of the other frames. But if I'd like, I can take my 3 other copies of the tight frame. I've got tight frame, a copy 2, and the little patch I made down here. And if I want, I can click this little link icon here and it will link them together. And you see they all show a little link on the right-hand side there. And selecting one selects them all. And they are linked as far as position, not as far as content. So if I have any one of these selected and I start moving, they all come together because they have been linked. So that's what the link does. We'll get back to the layer effects in a minute. The next section I want to cover is to talk about layer masks. This is the other crucial core skill that I want to teach you guys, and I'm very excited to get to this part. So this is layer masking. Layer masking allows us to add a mask to any of our layers so that we may hide or show parts of that layer when we stack it on top of other layers. In the areas where we have painted that mask black, those pixels will be concealed and they will not be visible. And in areas where the mask has been painted white, those areas will show, they will be visible or revealed. So white reveals and black conceals. In any areas where the mask has been painted with a gray value that's between black or white, those pixels will show up, but they'll be semi-transparent. The lighter an area of the mask is, the more it will show. Excuse me. The darker an area of the mask is, the more it will hide. Layer masks allow us to take a selection that we've made. So previously, we made all these selections and then we cut them out of the background, rather destructively slicing them out. This way, we can take a selection and we can turn it into a layer mask, and we can say, just hide the pixels I don't want to see. Don't nuke them, just hide them from view. I might want to come back later on and change the mask and maybe bring a little bit of them back. So I can come back and I can say, I missed a little bit of his pinky or his finger here. I'd like to go back in and paint that into the mask. If I've gone and cut the polka dot man out of his background and copied him up to a layer, then I have to go back and make that selection again and do a better job of cutting the finger. But if I use that initial selection to create a layer mask, this plus this, the pixels on that layer, plus the mask showing us which ones to show and which ones to hide, results in a layer with all this transparency. If I disable this mask, this entire picture is still there in the layer. But when I turn it on, the white areas are going to show pixels in my pixel layer, and the black areas are going to hide them. This is genius. So try to think whenever possible about working as non-destructively as possible. And layer masks give us this ultimate flexibility. What used to be a selection that I had gone and sort of cut out of its background with an X-Acto knife or a scissors, and I'd have to go back and cut out again. What I've done now is I've made that selection, but I've defined a mask that handles its borders, and that mask can be tweaked later on to reveal or conceal more of it. So let's take our knowledge of selections and let's use it to make a selection of just the polka dot man that has none of the background, because we'd like to be able to isolate him and put him onto a new background. Okay, so let's jump over to Lightroom or wherever you're getting your pieces from. I'm going to go to the, let's see, is it in layers and layer masking? I'll have to figure out which of these groupings I put the polka dot man into. He's probably in projects or something, or composites or something. Anybody happen to know what one that's in? Might even be in selections. Here he is. Here he's in selections. Okay, where's my polka dot man? Let's start with the original right here. For those of you that are just pulling the files off your hard drive, he's file number 9672. For those of you who are coming from one of the folders, you'll find it in selection and masking. I'm going to hit Command E to send it from Lightroom over to Photoshop. You can open it or get it to Photoshop however you see fit. So here's Mr. Polka Dot Man. And what we want to do is we want to make a selection that's just him and none of the background. We want to isolate him so we can, well, put him somewhere else. In this case, I find it's easiest to start with the select subject command, and then I'd work with the quick select tool to refine any areas. So I'm going to go up to the select menu, and I'm going to tell Photoshop to please use artificial intelligence to find the subject in my picture. And let's see how it does. I have to tell you, this routine keeps getting better and better. Here's what it picked up. Darn near everything that I wanted it to get, with the exception of the polka dot at his elbow, and you can see it's kind of the same color as the background. So it looks like it had a tough time finding that. And it missed the top part of his hula hoop here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to add those bits. And I find that the quick select tool, I can either click and hold on the magic wand and swap out for the quick select tool, or I can hold down the shift key and use W to cycle through all of the tools that are grouped together in the magic wand. Remember that the quick select tool is always going to default to adding to your existing selection. It's already in an additive mode. So if I come down here into my picture, let's zoom in quite a bit, and I want to add this little polka dot down here, there's already a little plus in the middle of my cursor indicating that I am in an additive mode. So let's just take a little swipe through here. And it looks like it didn't quite get the edge of that. And now I've added this little bit and I notice, we missed a little spot right down here. So let me take a pass through there. But you'll see that I added back in too much. So I'm going to undo that with a Command Z. I'm going to try making my cursor a little bit smaller, zooming in a little bit closer, and seeing if I can more deliberately add that bit. Add a little bit more. Notice that it keeps enhancing that edge. This little enhance edge option up in the tool option is turned on. So it's trying to clean up those little selections. And there it's done a pretty good job of bringing that bit in. If I really want to get fancy, I could hold the Option key down or Alt on a Windows machine. I could subtract out that tiny little bit in the corner. So now I feel like we've got a pretty good mask coming up into that cornered area there. Back out a little bit. It looks like we may have missed a tiny little bit on the sleeve here, so I brought that back in. Otherwise, I'm feeling pretty good about the main body of this. Oh, look, it missed this little bit of his hat right there. So we'll come in and we'll add that. And you can see how what I had said early on in the process, that so much of making a selection is you make an initial selection and then you refine it. I'm going to subtract that little bit out of there. That did not do what I wanted. There we go. I could come in and I could subtract this little bit out of the gap in the fingers there. And it did a pretty good job of that, I have to say. And I want to add back in the pieces of the hula hoop that got dropped. So I'm going to make my brush a little bigger. And what I'm going to do is click and paint a little bit and then release, because I want it to kind of enhance each of these edges as I go. Zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier for you guys to see this selection being made. My selection stops right here. So I'm going to come back. We're going to add a little more. And I could probably, there's enough contrast between this thing and its background that I could probably make a pretty judicious swipe through this area and get most of this into my selection. You can see why I love the quick select tool. So right here, there's a shadow and it didn't quite get those shadow areas. So I have to kind of get down into those areas to tell it that that is still part of the area I'm trying to mask into my selection or make part of my selection. Obviously, if I'm zoomed out, I've got a little bit more real estate to work with, but I've now come all the way around. If I back out a little bit and I hit the Q key to turn on that quick mask view, you can see that we have a lovely selection we've made here of just the polka dot man and his little hoop here. But there's a tiny area I have missed right in here that I need to get back. So let's switch to the wand or the quick select and make sure that we've included those little bits. I think there was even a tiny little bit up at the top here I want to bring back in. So now I have a nearly perfect selection of this figure. If I were to do what we've been doing in weeks past, I would have done Command J and I would have floated him up and made a copy of him in his own layer and it'd look like that. But if I had screwed up my selection at all, I have to go back and make another selection. So that's not what I'm going to do. Instead of floating him up to his own layer, I'm going to go down to the palette, layers palette here, and I'm going to click this icon that is the dark circle on the light square. That's going to create a new mask, a layer mask for this layer. It's also going to turn it into a regular layer at this point that will reveal only the selected areas. So you will hear me say a lot of times moving forward, all right, now that you've got that selection, go ahead and punch out a layer mask. And what I'm telling Photoshop to do with this selection active, and I click the layer mask icon, is to turn that selection into this, a black and white mask where white reveals and black conceals. And if you look very closely, you will see that I've got a little white box around not the pixels, which are here. If I paint here, I'm going to paint on the pixels. Let's pick up a black brush. And if I paint on the pixels, I'm putting black right on top of them. Maybe that's too transparent. There we go. Now you can see I am painting directly on this. But if I go to my layer mask and I paint with black and I paint over his hand, what do we think is going to happen to his hand?
It'll disappear.
It'll disappear. You can see that my brush has a slightly soft edge. If we look at that mask by itself, you can option click or alt click directly on the layer mask. We can see, and there it is, where I've gone and added some concealer to that part of it. Let's undo all of that. Now I've gone back to revealing that. So the takeaway here is that I have non-destructively made a selection here. And by using the layer mask, I can mask in or mask out any parts. If I were to take a brush with the letter key B, and I were to give it a white color, any place I paint on the mask, reminder, my little white box here is around the mask. Anything I do, I'm doing to the mask and not to the pixels. Get used to paying attention to which one you're on. But if I were to paint some white down in this corner, what's going to happen?
Reveal the back.
That is correct. I will be revealing some of the pixels that are on this layer like that. And let's say that instead of pure white, I'm at 50% white. I turn my opacity down on my brush. You'll notice that the pixels come back, but they're semi-transparent. And that's because in my layer mask, I've got gray. White reveals, black conceals, and gray partially reveals. The lighter it is, the more opaque that part of our section will be. The darker it is, the more hidden it will be. So these are layer masks. They're brilliant. They give us this incredible power of non-destructively editing a picture like this. So now if I want, I can go back to Photoshop and let's go grab, let's see, let's find ourselves a good background. Well, I'll show you what I had done with him. I'll actually just open this version of it. So having made a mask of my polka dot man, and you can see that in the previous version, it was a rougher mask. The tools work better now than they did before. The quick select tool, the select subject, they're all more refined than when I originally made this. I then brought in another layer and I put it in the background. So that's where I got this lovely Milky Way shot. And then in between the two layers, let's turn this off, I had a layer that was a crystal ball shot from the botanical garden. But what I did to this shot is I put a mask on it. I created a mask so that only this part would show through. And so therefore, this is what the crystal ball looks like. There's my polka dot man, and there's my background. And I'm able to make a fun sort of composite. If I have decided that I'm not happy with how this has gone, I can go into the layer mask here, this layer mask right here, and with a black brush, B for brush, hit D for the default colors. And if I come in here with my black brush, I'm gonna get real small and zoom in real close. Oops, what did I do? Oh, there we go. If I paint black in this area of the mask, must have painted white. That's what I did. And let's make sure I'm at 100%. If I paint white in here, what I'm really doing is refining the mask to hide those little areas where I had that ugly fringe getting out. And if I accidentally go too far and I eat into the polka dot, the hula hoop here, I can switch that to white and paint it back in. So black is going to conceal pixels from this layer so I can get all this little ugly crud down at the bottom here and kind of clean up my mask. Now I should be careful because I probably use that as the basis for the underlying mask. So what I've been doing is with the pixel layer visible, I have my active selection on the layer mask, and I'm using white and black to reveal or conceal. So this is allowing me to refine that selection after the fact. after the fact that I had selected him and cut him out of his background, I realized, you know, you did a sloppy job at the edges here, Jeff. You need to clean that stuff up. And all I'm doing is painting black into the mask in these little areas. Let's do it here. So if I come in here, I am painting black into the mask, and I'm hiding these bits of the pixel layer that I don't want to show through. I'm going to switch to white and paint in that area, and maybe get up in here where I was a little overzealous. So that's the idea behind a layer mask. Pay attention to whether you're on the pixel layer or the mask that is revealing or concealing that layer, and pay attention when you are painting on that layer to whether you are painting with a color that's going to reveal or a color that's going to conceal. That's how we can make these very quick and dirty, non-destructive composites. I see a little bit at the top of the hula hoop here where I knocked out too much. How do I get this part back? Somebody tell me what to do. Step by step. Right now, I've got the background layer active. I've got my Milky Way. How do I fix this ugly edge right here where I've cut a hole out of the hula hoop and I've got a little bit of extra crud here? Anybody in steps?
Well, you would go to your top layer, I believe.
Great. Step one is to select that layer and make it active. If I pick up a paintbrush and I paint right now, what's going to happen?
Let's see, you're going to conceal because black is forward on your.
Well, let's see what happens. I'm going to hit B. I'm going to have a nice big brush here, and I'm going to paint with the black. And no, that's not concealing anything. That's actually laying down black paint because it is my pixel layer.
Yep.
That is active down here. I'm on the pixels. I have to switch over to the layer mask. And with the layer mask active, you'll also notice that the default colors flip on you. If I am in the pixel layer, my default colors are black for the foreground and white for the background. But if I'm on the layer mask, it switches because, of course, white reveals. So with my brush, I should be able to paint in some white and make it reveal this little edge there. And that's exactly what it's doing for me. And if I'd like to remove these little bits here, what do I have to do?
Switch to black.
Is there a keyboard shortcut that'll exchange my black and white for me?
X.
X for exchange. I've now flipped them. You can also click the little arrow here. And having flipped them, I can now mask out from the hula hoop layer this little edge here. So I frequently have my left hand on the X key and I'm flipping back and forth between reveal and conceal. So I can paint in or out the areas that I want. If I want to come in here, I want to be in reveal. I can reveal this little bottom part of the hula hoop. I can come up to the top here and flip back to black, and I can conceal this little bit here. So this is a little bit like refining the selection, the way we used to modify our selections, but in this case, we're playing with the mask. And if you want to see the layer without the mask, you can actually shift click on the layer mask, and there's our whole guy. He's still there. All those pixels are in this layer. We have just selectively hidden them with this black and white mask. So yeah, if you shift click on the mask, it'll hide the mask and show you the whole layer. Your mask gets this red X over it, indicating it has been disabled. If I shift click again, it will re-enable the mask, hiding all of these bits. Layer masking, it's a huge concept and so important to what we're going to do moving forward in terms of creating these kinds of composites. Questions about this so far? Be sure to pay attention to those indicators showing if you are working on the image pixels themselves or if you are working on the mask. It's very easy to accidentally be in the wrong one. I do it all the time. Don't feel bad. Like I said, there'll be a small white highlight stroke around whichever you have active. Click on one or the other to switch from working with the pixels to working with the mask. Now that I have that subject masked off in its own layer, I can place that masked layer on top of or beneath any other layer, and only the revealed area will show. The concealed area is masked off and invisible. So there's the simple 2-layer composite using the masked layer that you saw, and then a Milky Way background layer. I do want to show you how to get a layer from one document to another, because there's an easy way and there's a not quite as easy way. So let's close this document. We'll stick with the original selection I made because that was a nice, clean selection we got there. Let's just find a good background to put him on. Oh, I don't know, maybe the jellyfish. Let's look at our whole folder full of pictures. You'd think I would have that, that sky up here and easy to grab. Did I include that in your sample images? Did you guys get a Milky Way with your demo shots? I can't remember. I may not have. Yeah, we'll put them on this road right here. So I'm just going to open up this random Missouri background. So how do I get, let's close that. How do I get this layer, which we're going to call Polka Dot Man? I've actually double clicked and I've named it. How do I get it from this document to another? I'm going to show you guys the easy way. A little bit of a trick, but once you learn it, it's a piece of cake. There are 2 documents open, right? My background here and my subject here. And I bring one or the other of them forward by clicking on the little name tab up at the top here, right? If I want to get this layer into the other document, here's how you do it. Go grab the layer by its thumbnail or by its name. So I'm clicking it and I'm dragging that layer. It's in my hand now, right? See, I've got it in my hand. And I'm going to drag it up to, and I'm going to hover over the other window tab. And when I do, that window is going to pop forward, but I can't let go yet. If I let go right now, it's just going to bounce back to that document where it was. But if I bring it down into the frame here, anywhere in here, and let go, it will drop this layer in this document when I let go. One more trick, if I hold the Shift key down before I let it go, it'll drop it dead center for me. And that's exactly what it did, is it brought Polka Dot Man over here, dropped him dead center. And now we can, move him around as we see fit. I think I'll cover up that piece of the road with his body. So let me do that again, because it's a subtle trick. I'm going to bring this file forward by clicking on its tab. I'm going to grab the layer I want to move to another document by clicking on its thumbnail or its name, click and drag it up to the other tab until the other tab pops forward, and then make sure, if I let it go right now, hey, where's my layer? I didn't get a layer because I let it go up here in the tab. But if I take this layer, bring the other document forward by hovering on it, and then bring my cursor down into the layer, if I let my finger off the clicker now, this layer will get dropped in this document. And if I hold the Shift key down when I do it, it'll get dropped dead center. That is frequently helpful, because if I hadn't, and I just drag this layer over here until that document pops forward, come down into the picture, wherever I drop it, it's going to be centered on that. And that's not necessarily where I wanted him to be. So this is the beginning of being able to make composites. Look at how clean our layer mask is at the edges and how beautifully and seamlessly it can fit in with this background. It looks like we got in there with an X-Acto knife and cut it out very precisely. There is a tiny little fringe you can see right here where a little bit of white got in there. But I have to tell you, the rest of the job, it did quite well. You can also copy and paste a layer from one file to another. I find this dragging it from here to there so much easier.
Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Jim.
just have to say, it's really cool.
Yeah, it is super cool.
It is pretty amazing what this program does. And now
you're beginning to see the possibilities.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. One thing that I've noticed when I replaced the sky, which was very basic, I think you did a little video a few months ago, is sometimes the clouds the sky looks way out of proportion compared to whatever photo I've dropped it into. If you took the polka dot man, can you squish him down to make him look?
I sure can. And the only reason I didn't do it is we haven't covered transformations yet.
Oh,
But yes,
yeah.
I can
Why don't
put
we
him in
take
here.
that? Okay.
And I can hit Command T and I can transform him down, and we can make him smaller so that, that his entire body fits in the frame. So yeah, we can absolutely squash and stretch and move and scale him the same way that we could scale the clouds so that they're in proportion with the scene. I could move, let's move him over here. We'll put him in front of the trees. Now he's caught the trees in his thing.
Plus he can see traffic coming.
And if we really want to get fancy, I can make a selection out of him. I can invert that selection and I can mask off the background layer. See if this will work. Yep, and if I wanted to, I could erase everything that was around him. We're getting a little out into the weeds there. So what I want to show you is some more demos of putting together a multi-layer composite. Check my notes here. Yeah, okay. So let's do several multi-layer composites here. Close out Mr. Polka Dot Man. Thank you for your service. All righty. We'll start simple. In selection and masking, you guys are going to find this firefighter memorial from Christopher Columbus Cemetery in Havana. And what I'd love to be able to do is put this on a different background. So we're going to combine making a selection, creating a layer mask, and then putting that layer on another background. So first I'm going to open this document up in Photoshop. And then I'm going to go back to Lightroom and I'm going to find something that I can use as a backdrop. Oh, you know what? It'll be in the sky replacement one. I had a bunch of skies, I think. Didn't I give you guys some skies?
Yes.
Oh, you know what? It's probably in a separate section. Yeah, I'd probably put that in a separate section for myself.
You've got a folder down there called Sky Replacement.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't have the source skies. It's only got the things that I'm using for that. But I happen to know that if I go to my filter here and type in SKI, that I've got some, here, we'll just grab a Florida sky or some other sky. Skies. There's a bunch of skies. Let's find a nice attractive sky in here. Oh, I want to pick one that kind of matches the picture that I'm putting it into. So it should probably be something from the middle of the day. Let's see. Oh, look, it's Sue. We'll find one from the middle of the day. Something brighter, maybe, because I want the composite to look at least somewhat natural. We'll try this one. Send a copy of that over there. So what I should have now is a sky in this picture and a subject in this picture. All right. Somebody want to suggest to me the easiest way to make a selection of just the statue. I want the crucifix at the top, but I don't want the lightning rod. And I want this all as a layer with a layer mask so I can composite it with the other one. Walk me through the steps.
I guess you would start with select subject.
I would definitely try select subject. Otherwise, I'd go for the blue in the sky and invert my selection. But yeah, select subject. You'll notice it did a pretty good job, but not perfect. It goofed. It didn't get the pedestal down here. It didn't get part of the crucifix up here. It left parts of the angel holding the firefighter. So surprise, surprise, select subject didn't work very well here. Instead, I'm going to hit Shift W to get back to the magic wand. I'm going to set my tolerance. Yeah, 48 is probably good. And I'm going to click in any of the blue sky area. My tolerance is too high. It picked up too much stuff that I didn't want it to get. I'm going to drop my tolerance. I'll cut it in half to 24. Command D or Control D to deselect Magic wand in the sky again, that's looking pretty good. That got me just the sky. How do I select everything else in this picture that is also blue? There's a modifier in the select menu here. Which one's going to get me what I want? Can I use the grow option to grow my selection?
Would
Well,
you
that
use
goes right
similar?
I would use similar. I can't use grow because grow is already run up against the edge of everything that's blue. But similar will find me everything in the picture that's blue. And I clicked similar, and sure enough, it got me the gap between the arms here, the gap between the fingers. It got everything in the picture that was blue. Well, that's great. I have a beautiful selection of my sky. But what I really wanted was my statue. Is this, look at this. It even got the little bit sticking through between the blindfold and the sky. But what I really want isn't the sky. It's the opposite of the sky. Is there some way for me to select the opposite of what I have?
Invert.
Inverse.
Anybody know the keyboard shortcut? It's a 3-finger one. It's Command or Control Shift I. So select inverse. There it is, Shift Command I or Shift Control I. You'll notice the keyboard shortcuts are just to the right of all these menu items right here. So this will select the inverse of what is currently selected. I now have a perfect selection of the statue without the sky. This is ready to be transposed onto another image with one exception. I really don't, first of all,
the lightning rod.
Yeah, I want to take out the lightning rod, and there's a couple of ways to do that. For me, I think it's much easier. I could come in here with the lasso tool, and I could hold the Option or Alt key down and just subtract out the lasso. But since we're talking about layer masks today, I'll show you how to do it with a layer mask. So first, I'm going to take this selection I've made, and I'm going to punch out a layer mask by clicking that little dark circle on the white rectangle. Click, and I now have this completely transparent. Here's my layer mask by itself. And if I want to hide this, what do I have to paint up there? Should be fairly obvious.
Black.
Black it is. And I'm going to make sure that my brush has a rather hard edge so that I don't leave some sort of semi-gray bits at the edge here. So I can come zoomed in here, and I can make my brush a little bigger here. I have to exchange my foreground and background colors because it's ready to paint with white right now.
Jeff, how do you make your brush larger and smaller?
I use the square bracket keys. The right bracket, square bracket makes it bigger. The left square bracket makes it smaller. You can actually see the little keyboard shortcuts in that gray banner on the bottom of the screen. So that's a left bracket to make it smaller. You can also, did they add this? No. In Lightroom, you can use the scroll wheel to make it bigger and smaller. And I think there's a way to do it in Photoshop, but I've forgotten how they did it.
Thank you.
I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paint black. And now I can just sort of make my brush a little bigger. Oops, wrong direction, bigger. And when I go back to look at this layer by itself, I have masked out or hidden from view that lightning rod at the top there. Now, I do notice that there's a little bit of a thin blue line all the way around this. Because I'm putting this on another sky, I'm not too worried about that. But had I seen that to begin with, I might have actually, select this. I might have actually contracted this, select, modify. I'll contract this by, oh, I don't know, let's see, 2 pixels, made it a little bit smaller. And in my layer mask here, let's invert that and fill it with black. And that would have allowed me to eat out the little edge there, eat away from it. So I've cut that down by a couple of pixels to sort of trim out that fringe I was getting. But yeah, I normally look a little more closely before I pop this off. I think we're in good shape to move this to another background now. How do I get this? We'll call this Firefighter. How do I get it into the other document as a layer? I have my other document open in Photoshop right here. How do I get it over there?
And hover over the other document.
Say again, Jim?
Take the layer that we did made of the firefighters memorial and drag it up and hover over the background document.
How do I drag a layer?
Right click and pull it.
A regular left click on the layer thumbnail or name will allow you to grab that
yes.
entire layer. I could be moving it up and down in the layer stack. In this case, I'm going to do what Jim said. I'm going to hover over this document. And when it comes forward, I'm going to make sure to bring my layer down into it. And as I like to do, I'm going to hold the shift key. There you see it, that on the little screen there, so that when I let go, it comes dead center. And sure enough, this has been convincingly masked into this photo. It's a pretty good composite. Now, obviously, my foreground is too bright for my background. Normally, I would have picked a sky that was more of a sunny day. And yes, I might actually scale this down so it fits in the frame a little better. But this is the essence of making composites. I started with a selection. I use that selection as the basis for a layer mask. And remember, if I disable my layer mask, the whole firefighter sky is still there, including the lightning rod at the top. The whole picture is there in that pixel layer by itself, but I've disabled the mask that's revealing or concealing parts of this layer.
Jeff, what are you doing to scale that bigger and smaller?
We'll get to that. I'm using Command T to transform.
Okay,
And then grabbing the corner handles.
got it.
I promise we'll spend plenty of time on transforming. So yeah, there's a very quick multi-layer composite. I want to show you one more demo here that I think really makes it clear the way layer masks work. Turn off my filter here. Let's go back to layers and layer masking. Let's take a couple of these vintage Bel Air shots. I'll take this one and this one. We'll play with these. Done Command E. Hopefully these will both open up in Photoshop. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do just for fun. I'm going to make a copy of this background layer. Anybody know how I can make a copy of this layer?
Control J.
Yes, I could do a Command or Control J. That made a perfect duplicate. That's a good one. Anybody know any of the other ways?
Just
I left click.
drag it down to the copy, to the plus.
Yes, drag it down to the new layer icon. I can also Option click, or actually it's Command click, or no, it's Option click. If I Option or Alt click on the new layer icon, it should make another one. Nope, that didn't do it. Yeah, the easiest is Command J or drag it down there. So I'll just do Command J. I now have two copies of this. I'm going to take the background layer. I'm going to disable the foreground layer. I'm going to call the background layer black and white. I'm going to call the foreground layer color. And I'm going to take the background layer and I'm going to turn it black and white. Image, adjust, black and white. And this is just for demo purposes. Let's make the reds be darker. All right, I've got two versions, right? A color version and a black and white version. I don't have any selection active right now, and I'm going to add a layer mask to the top layer. My layer mask is currently solid white, meaning that everything in the top layer is going to show. My layer mask is also currently active. It has the little white box around it. So I know that any painting that I do in the layer mask with black, white, or gray is going to determine what is revealed and what is concealed of this layer. I'm going to pick up the gradient tool, and it's currently set to go from black to white, which would be from conceal to reveal, wouldn't it? So let's say I want to reveal the left-hand side of this, but I want to conceal the right-hand side to let the black and white show through. I'm going to start on the right-hand side of my picture here, and I'm going to drag my gradient from right to left. And if you look at the layer mask by itself, it looks like this. None of this layer, a little bit more, all of this layer. These areas are completely showing, these areas are completely hidden, and everything in between is partially showing. And what that does, let's turn off the background, is it's fading out the transparency of that color layer. Here's where it's real solid, and here's where it's completely missing, and here's where it's semi-transparent in between. And that is what allows some of that black background to show through. So by putting a gradient across the picture here, we are blending from the red, fully colored foreground. We're going from color to black and white. We're going from Oz backwards to Kansas. So I like this as a demo because I feel like it makes it really clear what's going on with the layer mask. That this grayscale mask here is revealing and concealing parts of this actual layer. It is concealing the right-hand side, revealing the left-hand side, and partially revealing and concealing everything in between. So let's make a more interesting composite. I'm actually going to take the layer mask right here, and I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to drag it to the trash can. And when I do, Photoshop says, would you like to apply this before removing it? No, just delete it. So now it's gone. And instead of this picture in black and white for the background layer, I would like to grab my other Bel Air shot here, and I'd like to put this one as a composite with the other one. So I will grab it by its thumbnail, come over to this layer, wait till it pops forward or this document pops forward, make sure I bring it down into the frame, hold the shift key so that it's dropped dead center. Okay, now I've got my Bel Air and the little clock and radio bit. This is the right-hand side of the dashboard. I've got this on my top layer. What I'd like to do is I'd like to create a composite that blends this one with this one below. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask. The layer mask I added is completely white. So this layer is completely showing. And what I might do in this case, pull up my gradient here. Yep, we're going from black to white, foreground to background, is I might go from, let's try corner to corner. Let's just go sort of at a diagonal here. Now, because I started so close to the edge, there's nothing up here that's really fully revealed. And there's nothing down here that's really fully concealed. So I might start my gradient a little more towards the middle of the picture, so I get some pure white up here and some pure black down here. Let's go back to that layer by itself and see what we did. We've masked off parts of it. I don't particularly like the position, so I'm actually going to move the layer sort of over here like that. I'm going to go back to my layer mask, and with the gradient tool active, I'm going to go from here to about here. I want it to fade this picture out. And there we go. And now I've got a composite, a blend between the top layer and the bottom layer. So what do I do about these bits down here? I'd like the clock to show through more. I'd like these areas to show through less. In my layer mask, I can paint with a brush. B for brush. I can actually come in here and I can say, hey, I want the whole clock to be showing here. I'm going to make this brush a little softer at its edges so I can blend a little better. And then I'm going to switch from white to black because I would like to conceal from this layer this stuff at the bottom where I was sort of getting that edge. I just want to kind of blend my top layer in a little better. Now our layer mask is crazy looking. It looks like this. Let's go ahead and fill that in a little better. This area right in here is completely revealed because I wanted that clock to show. These areas are reveal, fading across to conceal, and these areas down here were concealed, causing that top layer to look like that. That's our top layer. It was a little sloppy at my edges here. Might flip that around, take my brush and clean that up a little bit. Except I'm in the wrong place. I'm in the pixels. I was painting black paint on there. Got to switch to my layer mask. Now I can paint in some black to sort of hide those areas a little bit more. And when the whole composite comes together, all those little seams aren't very obvious. There, they're hidden pretty well. So you guys starting to get the feel for this, of how I'm using a layer mask to reveal or conceal bits and pieces of the top layer. And instead of just doing it all black and all white as I had done previously, I put a gradient, a blend in there, so it fades from the top layer to the bottom layer. All right, we should probably take a break. We're way over. Questions about this stuff? Tell you what, I'll take the questions on the flip side. Let's just take 5 minutes here. It's 17 after. I'll see you back here at 11:22, and we will pick things up from there. Spacers to clap together anymore. As people are coming back, you can catch this on the video. I'm going to repeat some of the basic tips for working with layer masks. Reminder, when you're working with layer masks, any white areas of the mask will reveal the pixels in the layer. Any black areas of the mask will conceal the pixels that are contained. Any gray areas of the mask will be semi-transparent and will partially reveal or conceal the pixels contained in a layer. Reminder to pay attention to which thing you have active in the layer you are dealing with. Are you working on the image itself, or are you working on the layer mask that reveals or conceals that image? Easiest way is to look for that little white box, and I've included that in the notes. Whichever one is active will have that around there. It's an important distinction. Make sure you understand the difference between working on the pixels and working on the mask. If you want to see the layer mask by itself without the image, which I find is handy sometimes, you can Option or Alt click directly on the mask thumbnail to see the mask without the image. We'll talk more about manually tweaking it in a bit, as we've done. Okay, I'm going to do one more composite demo for you here, and then we'll talk some more about other layer types. So I'd like to take this Cuban boxer, and I'd like to put him on a different background. I'm going to start with a select subject. In this case, it does a darn good job of selecting him. It grabbed a tiny bit extra on his arm here. Just a tiny bit. I'm going to use the quick select tool and hold the Option or Alt key down and try and subtract out that little bit off the arm there. Looks like it actually picked up arm hair. Bring a little bit back in. That's decent enough for this demonstration's purposes. So I have a selection of just this guy. I am going to add a layer mask based on this selection by clicking the layer mask button. I now have him separated from his background, but in such a way that if I wanted to, I could alter that layer mask to bring back some of him or to get rid of some. If I don't like this little bit down here that sticks out, now that I've made my mask, I could come in here with a brush, shrink it down with my left bracket key, and I could mask out that little bit on the edge so it doesn't show up. Okay, I've got the layer that I want. He's been masked off from his background. I'm going to grab him by the thumbnail, come over to my other document, hover and pop it open, and I've got, well, the Cuban flag. Hold the Shift key down when I drop him in here. He's coming from a different color profile. Don't worry about that for now. And I did a quick resizing of him. And now we've got him in a completely new backdrop. I kind of like that. Actually, I might keep him down here. So that's a really quick and dirty composite, something very graphic. Obviously, this is a solid background. It's not a real photo of a flag, but you get the picture as to how you could bring elements together.
And then to get rid of the white, like in the blue field where his head is on the right, you could expand by a couple pixels his head.
Well, what I would do instead is, let's go to the layer mask here. I'm going to take the magic wand and I'm going to select this little gap right in there. And then I'm going to say, select, modify, and I'm going to expand that little area. Remember, I'm on the layer mask. I'm going to expand that little area by, let's say, 3 pixels. Now it's a little bigger. Maybe 3 was too big. I'll undo that, select, modify, expand by 2 pixels. Remember, I am in here. And what I've done is I've taken that little black knockout and I made it a little larger. And then I'm going to fill it with my black color, my foreground color, which is, oops, I must have had the wrong color there.
Okay.
Fill. Oh, yes, it was doing content aware. That should fill it in with black. That made this little concealed area a little bit larger, meaning that I ate away at that little edge. So yeah, I was able to actually fix that little area where by expanding the black conceal part.
Okay.
Or if I had gotten in there and I had accidentally gotten into, let's go here, delete, and I'd accidentally erased some part of this, I could come back with white paint and paint it back in, more reveal mask versus conceal. So you'll see how all of these things we've been talking about, making selections, refining the edges of selections, taking those selections and putting them on layers. But we get some pretty good blends here between our foreground and our background layer. They look pretty darn natural. And that's what we're after, is a natural blend. Any more questions about this process? I want you guys to try it out on your own with some of your own images or some of mine. All right, let's get back to talking about layers. Once you have more than a single layer in a document, you now have access to something that's called layer blend modes, which controls how layers blend or interact with each other. Essentially, these allow you to control how the foreground pixels will blend into the background pixels. Where any two pixels overlap each other, things in one layer or on top of things in another layer, you can do all sorts of interesting operations that affect how those layered pixels will blend with each other. You can add them, you can subtract them, you can do all sorts of clever pixel math on them that we could never have done in a wet darkroom, like the ability to show whichever pixel is lighter between the two layers. That's a favorite one. So let's say you have a simple document with two layers. Using blend modes, you can have Photoshop show you whichever pixel is brighter. That would be the lighten blend mode that you see right here. So if I have two layers in a document and I switch the top layer to the lighten blend mode, I'll see whichever layer has the brighter pixels. I'll see those pixels. Or darker. That would show me the darker ones of each one between the two layers. It's a deep subject and one that we could spend an entire class on blend modes alone. Suffice to say that I would encourage you to open or create a multi-layer Photoshop image sometime and change the blend modes for individual layers until you start to get a feel for how they interact with each other. They are grouped here and in the layer blend pull down by how they impact your image. Some will darken your image, some will lighten your image, some will add contrast, some will cancel or invert each other. Blend modes offer you all sorts of creative ways to combine your various image elements. Let's see, I think I have a slide here. Here we go. In this slide, you can see a simplified version of how blend modes affect the interaction between two layers. Let's start with the normal two layers. I have a yellow layer that is in front of a blue layer. And all of these others are showing me how those two layers would look if I took the yellow layer and applied a blend mode. Dissolve gets you this sort of, well, dissolved one. Darken gets me whatever is the darker pixel between each layers. Multiply is basically like in the old days, if you held two slide transparencies together, one in front of the other, and you looked through them, that's what multiply is like. It kind of lets it pass through. All these different modes, color burn, linear burn, screen overlay, soft light, hard light. These are all different modes. The ones I use a lot are normal, lighten, and darken. And I want to show you a good example. So in the upper left corner, you see the normal blend mode. The other ones, you can see the different ways in which they interact. Some are additive, some are subtractive. Some will lighten the overlapping areas and some will darken the overlapping areas. Some will add contrast and some will take away contrast. Multiply mode, the last one in the first row, as I said, is like holding up 2 slides to the light and looking at both. It's additive. It's multiplying the pixels together. So the overlapping yellow and blue areas get added together to make that green. Other modes produce different results. Play with them to get a sense of how they affect the interaction. So this is all really like abstract and obscure. And you're like, blend modes, I'm a photographer. Why do I care about damn blend modes? I'm going to show you a really good concrete example. In fact, I'm going to pick this print up from the gallery where it's been hanging for the last couple of weeks as part of a photography exhibition out in St. Charles. So let me get back to my Lightroom here. Let me make sure I'm in layers and layer masking. And what I want to grab are these 3 shots of the famous chain bridge in Budapest. 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot. They were all taken on a tripod. I'm standing in the median of the bridge here with traffic going by me in both directions. And what I'd like to do is show you how a layer blend mode is going to allow us to take these 3 pictures and combine them to make this one composite. 1, 2, 3, all come together to make the 4th picture. So here's a little trick I'm going to show you. For those of you that are coming from Lightroom, this is going to be a lot easier for you. You can take all 3 layers and you can right click. And instead of doing a regular edit in Photoshop, you can go all the way down to the bottom. You can say, open these as layers in Photoshop. And this will hand all 3 pictures over to Photoshop, and they will be 3 layers in the same document. If you're not coming from Lightroom, what you're going to need to do is open up all 3 pictures and drag each layer on top of the others so that they're all in one document and they're all aligned with each other. I'm just going to go ahead and open these up as layers. I can also show you how to do it individually. And hopefully, sometimes the first time I try this, it doesn't work and I only get 1 layer. Let's see if it's going to get the other ones. That's 2. And that's 3. So I have this layer, and this layer. So what I don't want to do is I don't want every part of every layer to add together because my finished picture will be far too bright. What I really want is I want the brightest bits of each layer. I want the car trails from this layer and the headlights from this layer and the taillights from this layer and the same from this layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 2 layers that are on top and I'm going to switch their blend mode. Let's turn off the 3rd layer. So now I've got 2 layers, this one and this one. I'd love to see whichever is brighter in both of these layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this top layer and right here where it says normal for the blend mode, which is just going to normally make these pixels be on top of the other, I'm going to switch that to the lighten blend mode. I'm telling Photoshop, all right, of these 2 layers, wherever you find 1 pixel on top of another, show me whichever one's lighter. And when I do that, I get the light streaks from this layer. Let's bring back our top layer, which doesn't have anything over here, but has some lovely color over here where a double-decker bus went by and gave me some lights up here. Let's switch this one, this top layer, to the lighten blend mode. And now all 3 of my layers are just showing the brightest bits. Now, I personally happen to think that this little section at the top got a little bit too bright. So I might actually, I think that in the background layer, I like how bright this is. But as I add these other layers, this top of the upright here is getting a little too bright. So I might actually come into this top layer, add a layer mask, pick up a brush, B for brush, and with a soft edge, let me make my brush a little bigger. Why don't I have a brush in my hand? B for brush. I can come in here and I can mask out those areas from my top layer so they don't show up so much. I'm going to go to my middle layer. I'm going to add a layer mask and I'm going to brush in a little concealer. And now I'm just getting the brightness value from that background layer. But the takeaway here was that it's the blend mode that allowed me to have the lightest parts of each layer showing through. There's the background. The lighten blend mode allows me to get the lighter bits from this layer and this layer. So this is a way in which I use the lighten blend mode regularly. I use it when I'm shooting car trails at night. I'll have my camera set up in a fixed position on a tripod. I'll take a series of shots, long exposures with the long trails of headlights and taillights coming off of them. And then I'll stack all those shots up in Photoshop and I'll switch the blend mode on them all to the lighten mode so that the lighter comes through. If I switch to the darken blend mode, it's going to look a lot different. It's only going to be the darkest bits of each layer, which you'll notice is hiding most of the car trails in favor of the road. Same 3 layers. But I've switched the blend mode to say, hey, when you show me this layer and you're showing it to me in relationship to the layer below it, show me whichever bits are darker. So obviously I prefer the lighten blend mode. So that's blend modes for you. They control how a pixel layer is going to interact with the layer below it. And it's typically math. It's adding the brightness values or subtracting or inverting, or so there's a lot of different ways that we can use this. That's probably all we need to say about layer blend modes for now. They may come up more as we're working on individual projects. But
Hey, Jeff,
yeah.
back on that photo, one of the things that worked for that photo was that the photographer off to the right stood still. You could have easily ended up with 3 of those guys.
I sure could have. And if he had moved, what I would have done is I would have masked out the places where he moved in the other shots. But yes, and this is funny, when this picture went up, I went to the opening reception for this show, and I had to stand by this picture for almost an hour as students there kept coming up to me wanting to know how it was made. They're like, how is it that that guy is standing still, that the bridge is still, but everything else is moving? And how long was this exposure? And when I explained to them that it was 3 shots brought together, they were a little more relieved. They thought I'd done some sort of magic or voodoo here. But you're absolutely right, Jim. In the places where my subject remained motionless between the shots, like here, see how there's a little bit of orange coming over this lion here? That's in one of my shots. Actually, it's in my background shot, but it's not in these shots.
Yep.
So it might actually make sense to go to the background layer, add a layer mask, and paint in a little black here. And look at that. Look at how I'm able to mask that right off of the lion. Because what I've really done, of course, is knocked a hole in this layer using this layer mask.
It's amazing.
It is amazing how it all comes together. And so this allowed me to reveal, yeah, that's good. And now I don't have that orange streak going in front of my line. Let's see if I can figure out which layer had these little bits of color on it. Not that layer. Nope, that's still the background layer. Yep, so on the background layer, on its layer mask, I want to make sure I get in there and black out these bits that were covering the lion's face. So it allows me to reveal or conceal. So here we've brought together several of the things that we've talked about today. Layer masking to reveal or conceal the bits. And you know what? If I don't want that blue line to go in front of the lion, let's see, what layer are you on? That's also on the background layer. I need to make sure that I mask out that bit as well. Smaller brush. And sure enough, I've been able to keep that thing from going across the lion's face there. And I did it by creating a layer mask.
Yep.
And that layer mask is just concealing just those bits from the background layer. I'm then able to make this layer interact with the one above it by setting the upper layer in the lighten mode. So I just see the lighter bits from that layer show through. Same with the third one. So yes, if my figure had moved, or if I wanted to change which bits were showing, I might do some layer masking. This was initially intended as a demonstration of layer blend modes, particularly the light and blend mode. But in this case, it helped us out to be able to go in and do a little bit of bonus masking on our individual layers to reveal or conceal different pieces that we did or did not want to show. And I could even let's take this middle layer with the real, let's see, where's the real bright stuff? Is it the bottom layer? So I could take this middle layer, and if I want, I could lower the opacity on it and make it a little more transparent. The more I turn it down, the less of that stuff you see. As I turn it up, I get more of that green back. So each of these layers can also have its transparency turned down. So if I turn down this top layer to like 50%, you can see it's much more thin and transparent now than when it was at 100%. So we have lots of different ways of bringing our little composite pieces together. So that's the light and blend mode. And this is a really practical example of how I use it day to day. When you look at this blend modes sheet here, you're like, this is all really abstract. I want to make sure that we give you guys these concrete demos so that it makes a little more sense to you. And in the case of what we just did, we went light and show me whichever pixels between the two layers are the lighter ones. That actually covered most of what I wanted to talk about this week. So I think I'll leave the remaining time either for demos or actually, I'll tell you what, we'll do a very brief introduction to the transform tool because I am going to talk about it in your bonus video this week. We'll do a deeper dive on it next week. I just want to show you the basics of the transform tool. And pick any of our selections here. And we'll take this one here. That's fine. So select subject should be able to get our subject. And it did an okay job, but it missed the knockouts and it missed the bottom here. So I'll do what I did before, which was to use a magic wand to select the sky. Then I'm going to right click and select similar, or I can go to the menu, select similar. And then I'll invert my selection. And I now have just the statue and the base. I'll knock out a layer mask. I've got it by itself. I'll open up another image that we might be compositing this with. I can get back to it. Oh, I don't know. We'll use the jellyfish. Why not? Just for fun. We're going to take our statue, grab it by its thumbnail, and bring it into our composite here. Hold the shift key down so it centers. Okay, my statue is too big. I wish it were smaller. And the way that I'm going to transform it, under the edit menu, you will find an entire transform submenu. I can scale it, I can rotate it, skew it, distort it, I can change its perspective, but I'm just going to do a free transform. That's Command or Control T. And when I turn on the free transform, I get handles on the corners here. If I grab any of these handles and drag in or out, I will make that selection transform to something smaller or larger. So I drag the corner out, it gets bigger. I drag it in, it gets smaller. And then you hit return or enter to accept that transformation. And so I've made a smaller version of this and put it in here. That's your basic transform, Command T. In the old days, up until about a year ago or 2 years ago, if you wanted that transform to stay proportional and not squash or stretch, you had to hold the shift key down. And for 35 years, my brain has been wired to hold the shift key down.
Jeff,
yes?
I'm having so much trouble with that right now.
Yeah, so they changed it.
Oh my gosh.
They changed it. And there's an option to switch it back to the old behaviors. So if you're like me You've been working with Photoshop forever. You're just hardwired to reach for that shift key. But when I do, now it'll squash and stretch on me. Oh no, drives me crazy because I'm so hardwired to do it. So yeah, if I hold the shift key down, I can transform this and it loses its proportionality. If I let the shift key go, my transform is always in proportion. For those of you who have been in Photoshop for so long that your brains are wired that way, like mine, there is a preference option. Under general, let's see, it is under right here. Use legacy free transform. There's also use the legacy new document, which I've also turned on. If you're like me and you don't want to retrain your nervous system, then you turn this on. And now when I go to do the transform, it's just like it used to be. If I don't hold the shift key, it's going to stretch all over the place. If I do, it stays locked in.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Wasn't that making you bonkers?
Yes, it's crazy.
So here's why Photoshop changed that behavior. Every other program on the planet keeps you locked into a proportional transform unless you deliberately tell it otherwise. Because 9 times out of 10, when I'm scaling something, I want it to be scaled proportionally. So they've made it the default now. Without the shift key, it's going to scale proportionally. If I hold the shift key down, I can then stretch it out. Sue, or any of you other folks who've had a little experience with Photoshop, feel free to go into your preferences right under the general preference and switch it to the legacy behavior. No school like old school, right, kids? A couple of more things I want to tell you about the free transform while I've got you here for a few more minutes. If I put my cursor outside the transform box you see here, if I put it on the dot, you see I get this diagonal arrow that's going to scale in and out. A little hard to see there. But if I put it outside that box, I get a rotation cursor, which tells me that if I click and drag, I can rotate my selection. She's waving at you now. Hello. So we can rotate this. I can hold the shift key down and I can rotate it in 15-degree increments. And then there's one more thing I wanted to tell you about this. So you'll notice that when I hit Command T and I grabbed one of the corner handles, the scaling that I did was towards or away from the opposite corner. So if I grab this upper right-hand corner and I shrink it down, it shrinks towards the lower left, right? Or it expands towards the upper right. I call this a corner pull transform because I'm pulling from the corner. But there are times when I want to scale something from the center point in and out. That is to say, I don't want it to go from corner to corner. I want it to go from the middle out or in. And if I hold the Option or Alt key while I grab a corner handle, I'm now doing what I call a center pull. I'm pulling my handle towards the center rather than towards the opposite corner. That can be very handy. I've dropped something down in a frame. It's too big. If I grab it by the side here and hold the Option key down, it's going to scale towards the middle. If I don't hold the Option key, it's going to scale towards the left side and it's not going to be in the middle anymore. So I like that Option or Alt when I'm scaling. That's center scale or center pull instead of corner pull or corner scale, which goes towards whatever the opposite corner is. When you're done with your transform, as I mentioned, you hit Enter or Return to accept it. If you don't like it, you can hit the Escape key.
I am sorry. My grandson is calling and my husband is trying to take care of that.
Yeah, if you could do me a favor and mute your microphone, that would keep
Oh, yes.
getting in.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Marcia. No worries. Been there. So we have a bunch of other ways we can transform, not just scaling it larger or smaller or rotating it proportionally or disproportionately. Under Edit and Transform, I have the ability to rotate and scale, which you've already seen. I can skew. And to skew, what they mean is skewing it up or down or skewing it left or right so we can make it lean this way or that. There, now it's in italics. So sometimes we use the skew to transform our piece into something that is a little bit more of a rhombus or a parallelogram. That's skew. Edit, transform. We also have, oh, let's get into my, what did I do there? Transform, edit, transform. There is distort and perspective. We'll do this perspective first. Perspective allows me to change the perspective. So if you've ever shot a tall building from a low angle, it's usually tipped away from you like this, isn't it? And all of your verticals are converging at the top. Well, you could take a building shot that way and you could use the perspective transformation to widen it out to actually tip the perspective towards you. Or we could also change the perspective and we could tip it left or right. So we can actually change the perspective of our image plane. And then the last one that they give us is a complete distortion. And if I go to distort, I can grab these corners and I can stretch this thing in any weird shape that I'd want. This is sort of the envelope that contains this thing. So you have the ability to make all sorts of crazy transformations to a layer or a selection that you've made. Then I hit return and there it is, and it's been completely transformed. So that's the transform tool. And that's how I was able to take some of those composites we were making and scale them to fit into another document. And the reason that I wanted to cover this, even in brief today, was because you will see some examples in the demo that I do where I have scaled things to make them fit the background. In the case of the Polka Dot Man composite, I've definitely shrunk him to fit within this Milky Way shot. Questions about today's material. This is big synthesis day. We are bringing together selections, which can then be copied up to their own layers. Those layers can have layer masks, which can reveal or conceal parts of those layers. We can bring those layers together to make composites, and we can transform those individual layers to make them larger or smaller or rotated or distorted so that our composite comes together with the proportions that we want. So this is a big sort of tying it all together, and it's why I put together that week 4 bonus video. You'll have the class video, but you'll also have 40 minutes of me going through all of these steps: selections, layers, layer masks, and transform. I might even play a little bit with layer effects, which we haven't covered quite yet. I've got 6 minutes. I could talk about it, but I'd like to do a deeper dive. Let me check my notes here and see what I would have covered on layer styles and layer effects. Yeah, I've got a section for next week. And in fact, the trick that I did using the gradient tool for layer masking, normally I teach that next week because we haven't gotten to the gradient tool yet, but you guys are able to sort of get a sense of what I was doing there by making part of the layer mask black and part of it white, and then blending together those two Bel Air shots in something a little more natural. So yeah, I think this is a good place to cut off. I'm happy to answer any more questions with the 6 minutes you all have left. Or I can turn you loose to go play on a Saturday.
Again, I apologize for the phone call.
No worries, Marcia. Happens to everybody. Somebody desperately needs to get a hold of you.
Well,
all I can say is my mind is blown with the blend modes. I've really got to work on that one.
It's so cool. And that particular trick that I showed you, I use it a lot with nighttime photography because I can set up in a single position and take all sorts of different things, man-made lights coming by and marquees changing and whatever. And when I blend them all together and put them all in the lighten mode, you get this wonderful additive quality where they all come together. Let me see if I can find another example of that quickly.
Would that work with fireworks?
Yes, it sure would.
Oh, yeah.
You could take stacks of individual fireworks shots and lay them on top of each other and set the top layers up in a light and blend mode, and everything else, all the dark background's just going to drop away. The only thing that's going to show is going to be the brighter one.
I've been playing with the layer blend modes for years and years, but I never really had it explained like that. So thank you. Yes.
We do,
but it's a lot of fun to just put things and then just click on them, and yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
I've got one more bonus video that I'll refer you guys to, and it's a demo that I did for Christmas. And it has to do with taking a bunch of pictures of your Christmas tree lights. You guys can see the screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what I did is I took a bunch of pictures of my Christmas lights on the tree, but I made sure to deliberately blur the lens so that I got all these just beautiful bokeh balls here like this. All right, I'm going to take these 3 pictures. I'm going to edit them in Photoshop as layers. I'm going to stack them up as 3 pictures in Photoshop. And when I put them into the light and blend mode, I'll get each of the individual sets of lights shining through. So I've got a demo that you guys will find. It's on my YouTube channel. And I go through a whole thing of like how to make a Christmas card by combining these. And I even have a nice crisp layer in the background. Okay, let's take this one, put it in the light and blend mode. Let's take this one, put it in the light and blend mode. And all of a sudden I have these 3 wonderful sort of overlapping layers of Christmas lights. And all I had to do is play with those blend modes. Layer 1 looks like that, layer 2, and layer 3. And I go on to show you how you could take something like a shot of an ornament. If you look closely, you will actually see the photographer reflected in the ornament. You could take a couple of more shots of a couple of ornaments or maybe the tree itself and put it in as the background. And then we could use layer masks. Let's go ahead and let's edit this in Photoshop. And this is going to be a tough one to select because it's just against this fuzzy background. But what I could do is I could do something like, I'm just going to do a rough selection around the ornament with a lasso. Something like this. This is going to look terrible. And then I'm going to make a layer mask out of that. And then I'm going to get into that layer mask with a big soft edged brush. And I'm going to knock away some of this stuff at the edges so that I've got sort of a smooth edge around it. This is very quick and dirty. Forgive my sloppiness. Because what I'd like to be able to do, of course, is take this layer into my composite over here and just drop an ornament in the middle of this stuff. Now I need to make sure it's on top of the other ones. And we'll put it over here where I can hide my sins of not selecting it very well, something like that. Might still have to get into that layer mask with a smaller, maybe harder edged brush and clear off some of the edges here so it blends more nicely with my foreground. But this is an example of everything that we've done: selections, layers, layer masks, and blend modes. I will add this bonus video into your class resources page so you don't have to go hunting for it, because I feel like it's another good demonstration of exactly the stuff we're talking about. And try this next year when you get your tree up. Take a bunch of shots with blurred Christmas tree lights on them and use the light and blend mode to create a composite that just shows each of the lights from each layer and leaves the darks behind. Fun, right?
That's a lot of fun.
Obviously, there are a million possibilities here. You know, what I'm trying to do is show you both the concept behind it and then some practical use of it so that you don't look at blend modes and go, who the heck is ever going to use the dissolve blend mode and for what? Like the invert or difference blend mode. The difference blend mode is really cool because it will show you the difference between pixels. So if I scan something in 2 big pieces, I can put them together as layers, and then I can use the difference mode to show me the difference as I'm lining them up pixel by pixel. So those blend modes each have some different little tricks I'll show you as to how you can use them. Any further questions?
Thank you. This is fabulous. All
Yes.
this information.
I'll see you guys in a week for more Photoshop core skills.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.